My nimiipuu name is Pakathaikatan, and my English name is Alan Pinkham, and I live at a place called Painima near Lenore, Idaho. I mostly learned the history that I know is from my father. His name was Kulkul Kiune, and he was Alex Pinkham. He said, "Oh, that's a place that I know," and he would tell me a story about it or some experience that he had, coyote stories and place stories and rock formations also. What these are called is mythical truths. They may sound like a story made up, but there's always a evidence of how this story occurred. There's truth in what we do and say about these stories. There's always something you can learn about from these stories. Well, this one right behind me here is just called the Old Man Fishing Place. My father, all he told me was an old man way back in history. He said when the high water came, he would fish from this rock. The high waters would fluctuate.
Sure.
And you can see steps on that rock. Well, when the high water came, he'd go up higher and maybe all the way to the top. And there's a reason why there was high water, even higher. Even when you go back over here on this hillside here, you'll find river rock way up, almost halfway up this hill. And then back of Asotin up this way, you'll find river rock, at least 1/3 away up the hill behind Asotin. Well, how did the river rocks get up there?
Yeah.
By floods.
Yeah. Yeah.
And high water. So we knew this occurred. And the story about the high water like this, and when the floods came, the nimiipuu, the Nez Perce, went to a mountain back up here on the prairie on the other side of Pullman. It's called Steptoe Butte now, but we called it the place where we slept with the animals because of the floods. So we would go to that mountain, and that's how we survived the floods in ancient times. From the Missoula side, the floodwaters went up, and that's why you find rocks higher up on these hills around here. There was floods that came down, from Boise. So there was probably a lake up there at one time, either formed by glaciers or, blocked by the mountains. But there was a flood during that time too. Okay, I want to tell you a little story about fishing for salmon. Just right up here, just below Asotin, there used to be columns of rocks and rock islands out there. And then the Corps of Engineers came along and took out the rock islands in those columns because they were making room for steamboats going up and down the river. But then before that, that was one of our major fishing areas for salmon. My grandfather and my oldest brother used to go there and fish. When my oldest brother, he was just a young boy, and they were dipping for salmon. And it was at night. And my grandfather caught something in his net, and he was pulling it in. He thought he caught a salmon. And when he got it up there in front of me, that salmon jumped out and went back into the river. It wasn't a salmon, it was an otter. And they had thought he had caught a salmon, but he caught an otter. And then further up, past the Soden, there's some columns of rocks that looks like claw marks on the bank. And it's actually rock that has these grooves coming down. And it's beaver. He was looking for material to build a dam. And so he went on upriver. And every once in a while you'll see these columns that look like claw marks. And then he got up to Whitebird. And just above Whitebird Creek, there's a beaver dam there. He was building a beaver dam. And the people were complaining, look what Beaver's doing. He's blocking the river off. So they got Coyote. So Coyote came and he said, well, I'll take this dam out. So Coyote was digging at Beaver's dam. In the meantime, when he was digging that dam out, the water flowed around and broke through and came back behind the dam. And that's called the Horseshoe Bend. And he was removing the dam, but he only got it halfway down by clawing it out. And then the people told him, well, look, the river's already broken out, and then now the salmon can go upriver. So Coyote quit. And now when you go up there at this Horseshoe Bend, you'll see the beaver dam that goes across, then where the water goes around, and there's a flat little notch on that beaver dam that Coyote quit digging. So he said, well, quit digging, the salmon are able to come up now. And it's still there now. Elbow baby. Well, there's a stone up in the National Park there at Spalding. It's a column about almost 3 feet in diameter. But they made a monument out of it for Reverend Spalding. But that is Coyote's baby board for his son. But the Daughters of American Revolution found our stone and Coyote's baby board, and they made a monument out of it in the park, and they stood it up and put it in concrete and made a monument for Reverend Spalding, not asking us where and when and who that stone belonged to. And that was in 1923. But prior to that, it used to stand up on the hillside, on that hillside behind the park. It was about maybe 1/3 of the way up that hill, but that stone rolled down the hill and rested right next to the railroad track. That's where the Daughters of American Revolution found that stone and made a monument. But when it was standing up on that hillside, that was our landmark, and we called it Itziaya Tikash for his baby. Coyote was resting there. He's been traveling up the river, and he said, oh, I'm going to sit down and rest on this hillside. When he was sitting down and trying to take a nap, something would itch on his elbow. When he tried to nap, he'd still reach over and scratch at his elbow. Finally, he got annoyed and he really started scratching. And he kind of sat up, and then something fell out of his elbow. And it was laying on the ground and it was wiggling. And he looked down and he said, oh, it's a boy. It's a boy. And he said, oh, how am I going to take care of this son of mine? So he picks it up and he's taking care of it. And he's feeding it as best he can. But later on, his baby got sick and it died. And he said, how are the people going to know that I had a baby son? And he thought, says, oh, I'll bury him downriver here a ways, and I'll put him up there on a ridge line, and he's destined to be a chief. So he lays him down and he makes an outline of a face and profile of a face and then a war bonnet. And he lays him on that ridge line. And he says when the river, traffic comes up and down the river, they'll look up there and it's said, oh, there's Coyote's first son up there. And that's how he made that landmark. All right, there's another story up on the Snake River here. It's quite a ways up the river, but there's red and yellow stains on the rocks up high up on the ridge line. And the story goes that the people were complaining, this monster is eating our children and we're losing our children. So they complained to Coyote, go do something about this monster, he's eating our children. So he goes up there and he taunts the monster. After he builds a fire on the rocks and he melts the rocks. And there's a pool of molten rock. And he taunts the monster. Says, oh, you don't know anything, or you're just too weak and all you eat is children. You don't really kill anything, you just eat young babies. And the monster heard him and he came over and he stood on the other side of that molten stone. And Coyote kept taunting him about his strength and his, deriding him about who he was. And the monster, he's getting mad. He's kind of prancing around and he said, I'm going to come and get you. And he jumps, but he falls in a molten rock and it spills out over the sides of the rock. And in that process, there's yellow and red stains on the rock. And then Coyote says, now your problem is solved. You got rid of the monster. But you'll see this yellow and red stains on these rocks. So something molten, what did burn? And so that's one of our landmarks up there. And then another story about the Grand Round River. The people were complaining. Pine Tree, he was the only one that had fire. And he'd guard it, he wouldn't share that fire with anyone. He wouldn't give it to other trees or other bush or willows. He just kept it to himself. In the wintertime, that's how he kept warm. And the people complained about him. Then Beaver said, well, I'll go fix it, I'll go find Pine Tree and I'll get fire for you. So Beaver, he comes down the river and he sees Pine Tree standing there, he's nice and warm and the coals are burning. And he gets up there and he taunts Pine Tree. Says, why don't you give that fire to other trees and bushes, and so they can be that way too, they can be one. So Beaver taunts Pine Tree. Pine Tree says, I'll come and get you. But Beaver, he jumps back in the river and he starts swimming down river, and Pine Tree's coming right behind him. Whenever Pine Tree would get close, Beaver would go to the side and then he'd make a turn and he'd cut the new bed for the river. And all the way down near the end to the mouth of Grand Round, you'll see these bends like this. Well, this is Beaver getting away from Pine Tree, because he stole a coal from Pine Tree and he stuck it under his arm, and he was bringing that coal down under his arm, and then when Pine Tree got close, he'd turn and he'd cut a new bank and all the way down like that for a long ways. And so Beaver got away. And he told the other trees, now you can have fire. So he was giving out fire to the other trees. So that's how other trees got the fire. And that's how Grand Round got those bends in it like that. Well, when the first trappers and traders came here, they asked us, who are those people down there? Oh, he said, those are people that live on the river that goes like this in sign language. And they said, oh, you mean the snakes? So they would call the Indians that lived in the Boise Basin Snake Indians. And that's not what we meant. No, we meant about the people who live near this water that goes like this. But then they called the whole river Snake River. The name of the Clearwater, where it comes in right here at the mouth of Clearwater, is called Kaiskiniki. The Snake River is muddy in the springtime. The Clearwater is clear. And Kaiskiniki means the clear side. And this is the muddy side.
The muddy side.
When they ask, well, what is this place called? You know, first settlers and traders that came in. And we said, oh, it's Kuskia. And what Kuski means is with water. It's named with water. So that's how Kuski got its name. Sometimes when we try to explain these things, they misunderstand.
Inem hemyuma kalautiwama. Hanaka in when the kissa tiskatel belti tokatimki. Soyapo Timki, Harry Slickpoo Jr. I just wanted to take the time today and talk a little bit about some legend stories that we can relate to the Hell's Canyon experience. And the first one that I will tell is just a brief summation of the original version, but you'll get the gist of the story. Wakepa, a long time ago, before there was any humans on this land, there was only animal people. One day the beaver, he was building himself a dam near what is today known as Asotin, Washington. Today we call it Hasutin or Hasotin. Both is correct. And so he was building his dam, and here, sure enough, here comes along it's a yaya going up the river. And he said, what are you doing here? And the beaver didn't even pay him any attention. He just kept building his dam and working away. Hey, I'm talking to you. What are you doing there? I'm building myself a dam. You mind your own business. It's a yaya said, well, what are you doing that for? If you build a dam right here, the fish aren't going to be able to pass into the people who live Matalaima, up the river people. So they got and started getting into an argument and fighting with each other. And it got pretty heated, and next thing you know, beaver was clawing at the sides of the hills. And that's how you can see those basalt columns across the river from Asotin today. Those are the claw marks of Tuxpel, the beaver. Hanukkah knocks to Twatisa, Taklai. Again, I'm going to tell another story. This one is about how Eel lost his bones. Wakepa, a long time ago, before there was any humans on this earth, on this land, there was only animal people. One day, the eel challenged the suckerfish to a stick game. And the suckerfish said, well, you don't need to look far to meet your match. I'm an expert at the stick game. They said, okay, don't let anybody interfere with our game. Just me and you are going to play. Hasu kene, ka mukats kene. They had eel on one side and suckerfish on the other. Hiko pi nakaaw nakaaw na piloch misich. They played each other all night long, straight into the next day. They played one another's stick game, gambling. By that morning when the sun was coming up, the eel had lost all of his bones. And so he said, well, I'm going to gather up as many scales as I have, and I'm going to bid those too. I'm going to bet those. And so he did. He went home and he gathered up all of his scales. So Hanukkah, piloch me mahit ko pi nakaaw nakaaw na. Again, they played each other straight through the next night, gambling. By the time the sun was coming up again, the eel had lost all of his scales to suckerfish. And that's why today the eel has no bones and no scales. He lost them all to suckerfish in the stick game. Petsy out, yeah. Hanukkah in kisa tiskat ilpil titoka timki. Ka soyapo timki Harry Slickpoo Jr. At this time, I'd like to take a few moments to explain a little bit about the definitions or the meanings and the significance behind some of the place names that we mentioned on the Hells Canyon trip. And so the first place that I mentioned was Seminicum. And Seminicum is a traditional word for a confluence of two rivers. So there's actually a couple of places that are known as Seminicum. The first one is at the confluence of the Laksa with the Salway, or Laksa Kasalwa. And so that's a major, one of the first major confluences that create the middle fork of the Clearwater, Himakas Nima. And so then here at Lewiston, Idaho is the most popular confluence, or the most, generally that term, Seminicum, is applied to the Lewiston-Clarkston area because of the confluence of the Clearwater with the Snake. And then, so that's what the name Seminicum means, is a confluence. The next one that I think I mentioned was Sakanma. Sakanma comes from the word Sakan. Sakan is a gorge or a deep canyon. And the ma at the end of that, Sakanma, refers to the people that were from there, or inhabitants of. So they were inhabitants of the canyon, or canyon people. Sakanma. So those are all the people that lived within what we call today Hell's Canyon, Sakanma. Another place that I talked about was Tamanma. Tamanma. Tamanma just means what we call today the Salmon River. Tamanmapayi, Salmon River Country. And so that's was one of the major bands, was the Salmon River Country, the Salmon River people. And each, drainage had their own little village or site or usual and accustomed place where the people would gather. Lamtama, Tamanma, they were all connected, and they were close neighbors with the Wallowa people who were right across the river in Oregon. So then we also made a stop at Imnaha. And Imnaha, so the people who lived there were called Imnama. Imnama. And so there's a little bit of I believe there's one version of interpretation. Imnamatnon was referred to a grizzly bear in legendary times. Imnamatnon. So in the Nez Perce language, there's a daily, everyday word that we use for grizzly bear, and that's chachats. Chachats. But when you refer to grizzly bear in legendary times, his name was Imnamatnon. So there's kind of a correlation between that Imnama and Imnamatnon. They kind of have that same relationship, or goes back to that same word of grizzly bear. I'd like to, where we're standing at now in the Clearwater River corridor here, we're just above Otwaima. Otwaima in the Nez Perce language means the old lady place, or old woman, referring to Miss Frog, who's frozen in stone at the bottom of the hill. That's Atwaiwechwecht, the old woman frog. And so this area here is full of geologic formations where our legend stories tell us that this is what happened here many years ago. And so the frog woman is one of those stories. Across the river we have more with Mitnitpa. They thought of us, and that goes back to the great council that the Creator had with all of the animal people. And he said, I'm going to be bringing these new creatures, the humans, to this land. And it's going to be up to each one of you to take care of them. And so I want you to become qualified and tell me how you're going to help the new people be successful in life. And so that place is right across the Clearwater, and you can still see the animals frozen in stone who were late to that meeting. As a consequence for their late, they were all late. And then directly above the hill from the animal people is Otsainamyats. Otsainamyats is the elbow baby, or more commonly referred to today as the sleeping chief. But he does have a name. He's not just the sleeping chief, he's Otsainamyats. And that's Itzayaya's only son that he had. And so a long time ago, Itzayaya Katilipa, Lautiwayin, Coyote, and Fox were best friends. In fact, they treated each other like they were brothers. And they each had 5 daughters. So one day, Itzayaya noticed a boil or a growth on the end of his elbow. And every day, each day, as the days went on, the boil would get larger and larger. Until finally one day it was itching, and he reached down to scratch it, and out popped his only son. Well, Kyle would go out digging for field mice or bringing in wood for the home. But while he was out doing his normal Itzayaya activities, he would leave his son into the care of his daughters and Tilipa's daughters. Well, one day the girls discovered that if they tickled the baby, he would laugh and giggle. And the girls said, "Hiyotzitskits." Oh, so wonderful to hear a baby's laughter. And so they continued to tickle the baby and tickle the baby until finally the baby became exhausted. He lost his breath and he passed away. When Kyle got home, he said, "Inem Tsalamyats, my child, my boy, come here." Nothing. So Kyle finds his son and his body just cold and motionless. And he sat down and he cried, Inimiat, inimiat, Nitsu, Nitsu, inimiat, inimiat, Miyochatocha yochat inimiat. That song means, my child, I will never see you again, my child. And Kyle said, well, my son was supposed to be a great leader, a respected warrior, fearless in battle, a good provider, a good hunter and good fisherman, and a great chief for all of the people. So to honor the life that he should have had, I'm going to take him up here to the highest place on the mountain and put him as a place, as a reminder to all of the people of the kind of life that you should live. And that's where he is today, across from Atwaima, is Kotsainamyats. So if you can see over there, there's some shadows, a ridge, just below the ridge there. It doesn't look the same as when you're from the ground level or next to the river, but that's him over there, Kotsainamyats. I don't know where I'm pointing to.
Well, you're pointing. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah, you're just pointing over. I mean, you can look over there to where you're pointing. It's okay.
Blooper point.
Blooper point, right.
He's that way.